we've raised an alarm. We've blown a whistle. We've said, hey, there's a problem going on in the academic world, in particular in certain departments, most of which are in the humanities, that are dedicated to studying identity. This problem needs to be fixed.
So look who I got here, James Lindsay.
Hey.
What's up, James?
It's checking out the beach.
Sure thing. Yeah, pick you up at the airport in town from Knoxville.
That's right.
Nice.
Straight to the beach.
Welcome to Los Angeles.
I'm enjoying it. The water's colder than it looks.
It's colder than it looks.
It's colder than it looks. Hard to walk in sand, too.
Yeah, so you're in town just for Joe Rogan tomorrow?
That's right. We're doing Joe Rogan tomorrow, talk about our project about grievance studies.
Yeah, what is that about?
Well, we wrote a bunch of papers. We wrote a bunch of papers that are billed as hoaxes. It's not quite what we did, but we'll go with the word. We wrote 20 papers over the course of the last year, got 7 of them accepted by sometimes pretty significant journals in fields like feminist and women's studies, gender studies, dug into critical race theory, fat studies we got, looked at queer theory and so on. This kind of stuff that studies identity in particular.
Yeah, these studies, gender studies, queer theory, why these specific subfields of academia?
Well, they seem to be pretty hot topics, and if people aren't going to do them right, and it looked like they weren't, then I don't think we're going to get the kind of progress that we want. So we thought it would be a good idea to take a look and see if the things we suspected about the field were true, which is, in particular, that if you flatter their biases against anything that might be construed to have privilege or power, then you can get some really absurd or unethical ideas accepted as if they're genuine scholarship.
If you flatter their biases, you can get in really absurd and obscene, immoral stuff into their journals.
Yeah, so you can make a contention that we can look at dog humping and dog parks and use that to draw conclusions about rape culture, and then use that to jimmy out a conclusion that it'd be okay to train men like we train dogs in order to combat rape culture.
So you can study dog parks, theoretically, come to conclusions about human rape culture or dog rape culture?
Well, we blurred the line.
We blurred the line,
and the reviewers were a bit curious. They're like, well, it looks more like you're studying human culture through a lens of dog culture.
Okay.
And so it was kind of one of those things.
Studying human rape culture through the lens of dog culture.
Yeah. So what we said was that we claimed that the dogs were humping each other, and that as humans that we can't really tell when dogs wanted it and didn't want it. So it's hard to determine if it counts as a dog rape or not. But we could watch how their owners interacted, and we claimed that we saw owners breaking up gay dog humping, but not straight dog humping, and that this tells us something about queer performativity.
You claimed that to be the case.
Yeah, we didn't see any real dogs.
You didn't actually go out to dog parks
no.
for like 10,000 hours?
Well, Pete goes to the dog park every day.
Yeah.
And our data does not reflect the reality of what seems to happen in dog parks in the slightest.
Mm-hmm. So some people have said you fabricated some data.
Yeah, we did.
But, I mean, the conclusions that you're trying to portray, the methodology of this data, those seem to be kind of bigger problems than just merely fabricating data?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things there. First, the data were ridiculous. Second, I think in the dog park paper, some of the data is actually impossible. It's like the numbers just don't add up. It's not possible for that to be the state of affairs, mathematically speaking, within like single paragraphs. Third, then there's the way we interpreted the data. And so that's really what we were interested in. So whether we had real data or false data, we would have misinterpreted it completely on purpose to see how they handle the interpretation of data. And they handled the interpretation of data really poorly. Some of our papers were like the dog park with absolutely ridiculous data that we then just made up whatever conclusion we wanted and pretended the data fit that. Some of our papers used heavily cherry-picked data. For example, the paper that we did that said that a guy goes to Hooters to find out why it exists, a gender scholar goes to Hooters to find out why it exists, claims that the guy spent 10,000 minutes in Hooters recording conversations, and yet the only ones that were deemed worthy of inclusion in the paper were the ones that fit the preconceived notion he had setting out to write the paper, which is that masculinity is a problem.
yeah, this supposed gender studies person went to Hooters to try to understand why Hooters even existed.
That was the original idea behind the paper. Yeah, I sat there one night and I thought it'd be really funny if we imagined, a gender scholar goes to Hooters to try to figure out why it exists. And of course, they're going to conclude that masculinity is a problem, heterosexual attraction to women is a problem, and then it'd be easy to show that by the way that men talk to one another in that setting.
Yeah.
And so we picked really, really caricatured, exaggerated examples of things men might or might not say. They're all made up.
Yeah. Yeah, so people might be hearing us and thinking like, well, so what? Who cares about what these, these specific grievance studies or gender studies academics think? Like, what does this matter at all?
What starts in the university doesn't stay in the university is why it matters. A lot of these ideas that you hear about, toxic masculinity is probably the most famous, white fragility is getting a lot of traction. These are straight out of the academic literature. So what happens is, as we kind of showed, it's possible to start with the idea that you want to forward, say toxic masculinity or something about dog humping and rape culture. You can start with a conclusion in mind, and then you can put that conclusion forward, put it through this scholarship that's not capable of detecting nonsense or prejudice posing a scholarship, and then they legitimize that by publishing it as serious academic work, and sometimes in quite serious journals with long histories or significant, academic influence. Hypatia, for example, has a ton of influence of feminist philosophy, published one of our papers, or accepted one of our papers. It was on the verge of being published. And so once those ideas become legitimized, they then are easy to, say, teach in courses or prepare for practitioners like counselors and social workers and so on. You can easily get them in the hands of activists who then will put them either into policy or they'll put them into educational initiatives. And so they get taught to students. The students then go off and get jobs, and now it's in the corporate world or the industrial world or wherever they go. Media is a huge one.
Gotcha. So there's some biased politics going on. It's going into some specific academic fields. The scholarship is not rigorous. It's basically just putting ideas through this.
But certainly possible too. So we wrote papers that were complete bollocks that started with what we wanted to conclude and made the literature support it. So we don't know how much of this, we don't know how to know how much of the stuff that's there is doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And so that's a problem. And just like somebody criticized, they wrote an article today criticizing it at London School of Economics or something like this, in political science, I think. And they wrote this article and they said, well, one of the things the people that did this project don't understand is that we don't talk just to other academics. We talk to lots of people. We talk to policymakers. We talk to educators. We talk to practitioners. And I was like, no, actually, we do understand that. That's why this was something worth getting into.
Yeah. So, stuff comes out of these fields, and the topics of these fields, they're stuff that should be studied, but studied well.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really contentious what's going on. You look around the country, you look at what's going on with issues of gender, sexuality, race, so on. These are huge topics. They're of incredible importance. A lot of stuff, really, really important stuff. Structural biases that really do exist need to get straightened out.
Yeah.
And what we need to do to figure that out is we need to figure out what's really going on as best we can. And once we've got that best information, we can act upon that. And so we should be able to trust that the scholarly literature is producing that best information. And so we set out on a project to show that there's not a lot of reason to trust that that's actually what's going on. So some reform is needed.
Yeah. What's so bad about these scholarship? What's so bad about them?
So the most important thing, I guess, to point out is every one of our papers started with the same thing. We started with the crazy idea we wanted to see if we could get into their literature. Mm-hmm. And so when you start with the conclusion and then you work backwards to get there, you're not doing real scholarship.
Yeah.
And we were able to get papers accepted. We were able to get papers recognized for excellence of scholarship. We got compliments like, this is a truly marvelous paper. This is an important contribution to feminist philosophy. this is a wonderful paper, this is an important idea, we've made progress into the soft sciences, we want to get into the hard sciences. We got all this like really worthy praise of what we were doing. And we did the work backwards. I mean, completely backwards, and did it egregiously, to where scholars who are trying to study this stuff rigorously should have been able to pick up on it, and they couldn't.
You started with your conclusion first, and then just fit the data and fit other scholarship to support your own conclusions.
Yeah, there was always a citation. So, some people have said, are you going to write more papers? And the answer is, I seriously hope not. I'd rather just point you to the literally thousands of papers that already exist. Every time we wrote a paper, I wanted to write a paper about gentrifying cornbread and saying that perpetuates America's racial divide because white people are putting pumpkin spice in cornbread and making it so we can't have, interracial tables or something. And so I go looking into this, and there's already literature, not specifically about gentrifying cornbread, but about how, various things about food are tied up with notions of gender or race. And of course, it's always got to be the same thing. It's always divisive. Hamburgers are too manly. Hot wings are too manly. They market them in manly ways. This promotes a nasty kind of masculinity. Men are bad. I mean, it's like this over and over and over again. So there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of papers like this already out there.
Yeah, and it leaks out into the corporate world, into just regular education as well.
So what do they call it? Implicit bias training is like all the rage right now. There's no evidence that supports that implicit bias training works or does anything. In fact, there's evidence showing that it probably doesn't do anything. And yet it's like, oh, Starbucks got busted. Probably they did something wrong. And now next thing you know, boom, we're just going to do implicit bias training for everybody. Then you got a diversity officer working at every university and even a lot of corporations now. The New York Times has a gender editor. I mean, what's going on?
Yeah. And I've been listening to some podcasts about some criticism that you've had some of this. And it's like, one criticism is like, well, everybody knows these studies are putting out really weird and unscholarly stuff. Like, is still a problem though, right?
Right. I mean, so if everybody knows it, the question is, why has this been going on for 30 years and nobody's done anything about it? People have tried, and they got called sexists and racists for saying that they're using sexist or racist ways of knowing. And these fields have not only persisted, they've continued doubling down and getting more and more activist in their orientation as they've gone. So if everybody knows it, my question is, why aren't you fixing it? If you already know it's a problem, why are you letting it slide? Why do you just keep letting it slide? So something had to draw attention to it. Some people want to know why we didn't do a more rigorous and careful traditional study where we do some huge survey of their existing literature, do thematic analysis of what's going on, blah, blah, blah. Well, other people have already done that to no avail. It didn't get the kind of attention necessary. It seems like, and the literature reflects it, and these fields reflects it. It seems like when people don't want to have a conversation and have jimmied the system to where they're unwilling to or unable to revise their beliefs, then you have to do something else that shakes them out of that situation, or it's just going to continue, which is exactly what we've seen. I mean, these people are, in a sense, bullies that have taken over a lot of administrative stuff. They rule mostly the education systems. How you get it out? Well, you got to embarrass them a little bit, I guess.
Yeah, there's the new book from Jonathan Haidt, Coddling of the American Mind, going through a lot of how colleges, like professors or just even students in general, feel they're kind of restricted in their speech. They can't say a lot of stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And so this is another thing. This is where I was saying, it's not really hoaxes, and that's kind of important. That's not what we did. We didn't just write hoaxes. We learned the field. Several of our papers, as some of our critics have pointed out, are legitimately papers in the fields that we did. That's correct. They are. That's the problem.
Yeah.
But now we've done something that I think it's fair to say no one else has done, is that we actually went in and we didn't just mimic and mock this material. We learned this material, and we can speak this language. We understand why they think what they think and how they do what they do, and we know why it's broken.
Yeah, like, what was it? A year ago, 2 years ago, you did the conceptual penis, and some criticism of that is like, well, you don't really know anything about these fields. You're just mocking it.
They were right.
But now you've spent a year and a half reading the literature from all of these fields, or a lot of it.
Yeah.
and you've come kind of experts in it yourself.
Yeah, we took the criticisms of conceptual penis really seriously. We started learning the literature. We started using the peer review system as kind of our tutor. We would try to learn the ideas and then reflect them back, or feed them back into that system, see what the reviewers would say, and use that to correct ourselves and get better at knowing it. It's the same as when you write a paper for your professor, and then they mark it whether you've done right or wrong or so on, and then you improve. Except we were using the highest level of academic scholarship as our feedback device.
Yeah. In your studies of these studies, did you find anything interesting or useful from any of this?
You mean the ideas that they put forward?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think actually it's really a tragic thing. A lot of their ideas are pretty clever. I think these people do have a real eye and a real talent for identifying stuff that's going on in society and actually kind of putting a finger on some of it and even coming up with useful concepts, even if they tend to name them in bad ways. Toxic masculinity is not the best linguistic construction. White fragility is not the best linguistic construction. But do these concepts probably carry some merit? Yeah, probably. Should they be studied rigorously and empirically? Yeah, I think so. White fragility, for example. I grew up in the Southeast. I watched people react to losing, even in the 80s and 90s, losing status that came with being, automatic status with being white, as the country became more and more racially progressed.
Okay.
And was there something like white fragility going on? Yeah, in some people. So those are the kinds of questions. Well, in who? And what characterizes it? And what do you do about it? And how bad is it? And what causes it? Not, oh, you're white, you grew up with privilege, therefore you're fragile and you can't handle criticism, therefore what you're saying isn't a real criticism, it's just you lashing out, which is how it gets used out of this literature.
Yeah, another criticism is like, well, why don't you just write literature in their studies, like criticizing their studies?
They won't publish it.
They won't publish it?
They won't publish it. Absolutely not.
Has anyone tried that at all?
You can criticize, and they criticize each other endlessly, but you have to do so within the orthodoxy. You cannot criticize the overarching orthodoxy that power and privilege are determinant of everything. You cannot question that and get it published.
It just doesn't get into the journals? It just
It'll
gets
be,
desk rejected?
You'll be told to, well, probably desk rejected, but you'll be told if it gets to peer review, this needs to be renuanced, this needs to be problematized. For example, our paper that copied Mein Kampf used the idea that feminism should unify around allyship, and they told us that unification of feminism is impossible. Rethink this. So there's some evidence for that, first claim. Secondly, they said allyship contains natural power dynamics, and when somebody claims ally, they give themselves power and create a power dynamic, and that needs to be renuanced and problematized. Both things right there, one paper.
I mean, yeah, and this goes against a lot of, what Jonathan Haidt is saying about, we need common humanity identity politics. It's so easy to divide people into separate tribes.
Right.
Like, you can have people pick, if there's a jar of gumballs, is it even or odd, or is it a certain amount of number? And you have the overestimators and underestimators, and that can divide people.
Yeah, it's easy to divide. It's more valuable to show what we have in common, to remember that, we're all human, first of all. If we're going to be in the United States, then we have being American in common. This isn't a natural appeal to nationalism, but we do have something going on here that we do share in common, that we have certain values that define what our country, has been, our legal structure we've grown up in that we're all familiar with, our culture that comes along with that. And so we can appeal to that. Whether, we agree with it or not, we can always appeal to that and find common ground with people who maybe think differently. Or we can start cutting people apart and saying, oh, well, you're a black American. Oh, you're an Asian American. You're a white supremacist, because it's all white people are white supremacists in the literature. In the most extreme literature, not all the literature, of course.
What would be like the best case scenario once people learn about this stuff? Like, what are some steps like academics can take, or just regular people can take?
That's two very different questions.
Yeah.
So academics need to do their academic thing. They need to drill down into what's going on in these fields, study it the way that they are criticizing and saying that we should study. Now that door's open, they should go through it. Will help. if we can. But study this stuff rigorously. See what's actually going wrong. Take our project, our audit as a starting point. See what's actually going on in those fields. See what's right, see what's wrong, and start trying to separate wheat from chaff. What everyday people can do is say, you know what, I'm not going to believe this stuff. I'm not going to go along with this until it's been reformed. So that can create pressure, say, for the university to want to do that by, say, not sending students to those departments. Who would want to major in this stuff right now? I mean, honestly, it just got egg all over its face. You could have people, you know, there's a, say, of some kind of initiative, like a diversity initiative at your office. Question it.
Yeah, you hear a lot about, you know, diversity, equity, inclusion. Are these like signs of that these types of studies have infiltrated your work, or
Yes.
Really?
Those are terms straight out of grievance studies. Yes.
So if you find that in your company or whatever, what do you do? Do you just
I mean, that's the hard part, right? Because I can't ask people to go fall on their sword, because it's not going to go well for you if your company's already instituting this stuff. But it's got to be questioned. And the only way to face up to it is either to bow to it and hope somebody else is the one who steps out, or to be one of the people who's willing to say, wait a minute, I saw this project. Some people did, you know, James Lindsay, Peter Boghossian, Helen Pluckrose, they did this project. It showed that the scholarship the stuff's based on might not be rigorous. We might want to think more about this before we implement it. And if lots and lots of people point to things like that, then, you know, maybe there's going to be some rethinking of it.
Yeah, like if the policies are based on the scholarship and the scholarship is based on just their methods, if the methods are not up to par, we can't trust whatever they say.
I can't trust what's coming out of these fields. So is there value to what these diversity, inclusion, equity initiatives? Probably. But how do I know what I can trust and what I can't? That's the problem. And until some kind of thorough review showing what we can trust and what we can't trust has taken place by people outside of these fields, it's very difficult to say why they should be implemented. I don't think they should be implemented.
What would be a better diversity, equity, inclusion program you could think of?
You know, in general, I would say that you want to minimize anything that's a form of overt or even implicit discrimination. So if your hiring decision is being made based on somebody's gender, race, unless it's some niche thing, like I learned in the process of this, Hooters hires attractive women, and they've defended in court that they can do so. It's part of their brand.
Okay.
But in general, your hiring decisions shouldn't be based on this. And a great thing you could do is you could actually blind your applications, you know, for the first round or something like this.
Yeah.
They show that this is, I think there's stuff out there saying, I haven't studied rigorous gender studies and things, so I don't know for sure, but I think there's stuff out there that has shown that, you know, you see different outcomes when you have blinded applications.
Yeah, if it turned out more men would be selected with blinded applications, and that's just how it turned out, could we be okay with that?
I mean,
if they're the best for the job.
I think that's what it has to come down to, right?
Yeah.
Is what reality is what reality is, and what goes into why a candidate pool is the way that it is, or a qualification pool is what it is. Those are relevant variables. A lot of people have been lately talking about the Norwegian gender paradox, and there's solid evidence showing that there is a psychological bias. We are not perfectly aligned, male and female, for example, how our interests tend to lie. There's tons of overlap, of course, but we're not perfectly aligned. In general, you see slightly more interest in men toward working with things. You see slightly more interest in women working with people. Things can also mean systems, as it turns out, and people can mean networks.
So that means computer science, stuff like that, science. Right,
and so as has been pointed out, when you get out to like the high, if you see slightly different means and roughly the same variance to talk statistically, when you get out near the tail ends of those distributions, you're going to see dramatic differences. So you might see, you know, within people who want to do whatever normal job, very little gender difference in their interests. But if it's something very specific like engineering that's extremely dedicated toward systems and things, that difference in interest can lead to difference in talents and qualifications that are rather significant. And so in countries like in Scandinavia, you often see something like 90% of engineers are male, even though the women are perfectly capable of learning and doing engineering. It's just a matter of what they've chosen to study and put their time into.
Yeah, just whatever they're interested in. They're just, by that time, they're just not choosing tech.
Right, and so
Yeah.
the thing that here Helen has pointed out many times in the past, and I don't think it gets nearly as much attention, is that when feminists complain, oh, well, we need to fix tech by putting more women in tech because men seem to choose to be in tech a lot, she's pointed out that that's actually a sexist attitude being held by the feminists that's maintaining sexism, because it, as she's worded it, puts men in the position of being the default human that women should have to aspire to be. Now, I'm sure they don't mean to be being sexist with their approach by trying to make things generic, but if you're absolutely committed to a belief that there are no intrinsic gender differences at the level of being influenced by biology, there's no way to explain why there would be differences in interests. And so this is a complete mystery and a complete paradox that more or less evaporates the second you realize maybe when you look at huge populations of people who are slightly different on average, you will see differences in behavior, especially when you get to stuff that's highly involved in whatever those particular talents are.
Yeah, so I'm sure there's a lot of prestigious categories of jobs that women dominate. Should we, there's no really reason to try to get parity there.
Let me use myself as an example. I'm a guy. I don't want to be an engineer. I don't want to work with systems that much. I don't like it. It's not my thing. I'm somewhere in the curve that's not at the extreme. But then there are people I know, some are women, most are men, who are so into working with systems that it's like you know them from teenagers, that they're just bending themselves toward becoming engineers. They want to build and design systems. Some of them are women. Turns out that when you get to that level of commitment to doing that kind of a thing, you're going to see more men than women because of what seems to be evidentiary-based differences in interests.
Yeah.
I don't have that. I'm not on that part of the curve.
So it seems like it reminds me of Jonathan Haidt's fairness distinction. When people see disparities, some people think, well, that's obviously discrimination. It's because of the disparity. But there could be procedural fairness going on that makes that disparity fair.
Sure. Yeah, I think that there's Heidt's pointed out that there's a lot of sensitivity in liberals to the care and harm axis, for example, but when it comes to fairness, they're very, very sensitive to the idea that somebody is being cheated out of something that they should have a shot at.
Yeah.
They're not being given a fair opportunity to step up to the plate, so to speak. Conservatives see fairness slightly differently. They tend to be aware of that, but hypersensitive to the idea that somebody's getting something they shouldn't, something they don't deserve or haven't earned. And so it's a different way that fairness plays out in each direction. So with people that tend to bend toward whatever the left, liberals, whatever we're actually talking about with that moral predilection, the overwhelming concern with fairness is that somebody is going to get cheated out of an opportunity, and they're so hypersensitive to this that they see it happening via means like discrimination where it probably isn't actually happening. Not to say that these aren't things that are happening. They happen, of course. But, you know, the old saying is when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. They're seeing a lot of nails that are something that aren't nails.
Right. I mean, we have certain problems in society, and there are better and worse ways to solve these problems. And, the more we should understand reality to understand how to solve the problems.
I mean, that's what it all comes down to.
Yeah.
Reality is the last arbiter. I think an old saying about that is reality always bats last. So if you want to arrange your system so that it cheats reality in some way, that you have some favored system or situation that you want to replace, if you want to replace what's going to actually, come up against reality, you don't bat last with your ideology. Reality is going to come in and it's going to knock it down eventually. To kind of screw this back to the project a little bit, this is what's going to happen right now. We've put we've raised an alarm. We've blown a whistle. We've said, hey, there's a problem going on in the academic world, in particular in certain departments, most of which are in the humanities, that are dedicated to studying identity. This problem needs to be fixed. So the academics can belly up to the table and they can fix it, or they can wait for the reality to come in. And the reality here isn't, gravity. The reality here is that political backlash is eventually going to come for the university, and it's really kind of already starting. And when the angry conservatives come and they start shutting down departments, they're not going to do it the way academics would want. They're going to do a lot of damage, and it behooves everybody to start paying attention and saying, look, we get these departments in line with proper epistemology, with robust production of knowledge, and then by owning, a claim on trying to do this in as much accordance with reality as possible, rather than putting ideology ahead of reality, we can stave off the other reality, which is that ideology gets run over by other ideologies as soon as it gets a chance. And a backlash is coming, and it won't be careful. And the university now has an opportunity, the academic system has an opportunity to start cleaning up before the backlash comes.
Yeah, so if we're seeing Trump get reelected in 2020 and the left still plays this type of game, we're just going to keep seeing bad things happening.
Yeah, Trump is a reactionary situation. Trump got elected because of a reactionary situation. You can point to whatever you want. You can say all the racist history in the country, all the sexist history in the country that you want to talk about, but something has inflamed it to the point where it would vote for Donald Trump over literally anything. And it's an astonishing thing. And you can look and you can say, oh, well, the Russians this, or the, this and that, all the different stuff. Yeah, look how much stuff it took to get him elected. It's amazing the guy got elected. It was very difficult to get the guy elected. And if you talk to almost any conservative who's, really engaging with what's going on in culture right now, they will all tell you that part of their reasoning was that they had to stop this gender studies stuff. I see it every day. I say some stuff about, I'll go on Twitter and I'll say, agreeing with John Roush and Benjamin Witt, we should boycott the Republican Party this fall. I think we should. I think everybody, yes, you should all vote down the ticket, blue. Democrat everything. I don't care. Just don't even read it. Just blue everything. Why? I can get into the whole thing about balance of power, Republicans have too much, Constitution, blah, blah, blah. I think this, and I put it on the Twitter, and I get bombarded. I get firebombed, hundreds of people. But don't you see what the left is doing? Of course you do. You know how bad it is. We can't let that get empowered. And it's like, there is reactionary fear against the stuff that's coming out of the academic and activist left, which are blended together on a very strong front. And if that reactionary fear keeps getting pushed, it's going to keep winning. Mark Lilla explained why. Mark Lilla explained when you have a group that's either majority or dominant power, if you want to talk in grievance study language, or has a plurality, whoever has the biggest identity group in essence and can motivate it the most is going to win the identity politics game every time. A loose coalition of squabbling minorities can't beat an angry, scared near majority.
Yeah, it seems like the left just keeps poking this bear and bad things will happen.
I don't want to put all the blame on the left. I don't. The right is an order of magnitude bigger problem. Right-wing media is an abomination. It's not okay. They've been stoking these fires. The people on the left aren't wrong. They've been stoking these fires for decades.
Yeah,
But you have to ask a question. Why is it that since Barack Obama took office in 2008, that's 10 years ago, why is it that the Democrats have done nothing but bleed offices to the point they've lost like 1,000 legislative seats across the United States, state and national legislatures? 1,000. They're bleeding offices. How is it possible that this is what's going on in a situation where the branding of the Republican Party for the last decade has been, they're the stupid party. How is it possible? You see, Jon Stewart wasn't wrong when he called Fox News bullshit mountain.
Sure not.
How is it possible that the Democrats keep losing to the point now where the Republicans hold nearly every lever of power, to the point where they could actually rewrite the Constitution with one more state legislature, unchecked? How did we get here? The Democrats are doing something. The left is doing something that is making the left or the Democrats unelectable. And the only clear thing that they're doing, there's a lot of things they're not doing. They're not putting out a great platform, etc. They're not stoking up, the middle American man and woman.
Mm-hmm.
They're not reaching to the common person, blah, blah, blah. They're not doing the thing that they're supposed to do as a left party. But the one consistent thing they're doing is more and more and more and more and more political correctness and identity politics. And people hate it.
Yeah, common enemy, identity politics.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So, yeah,
So it matters.
gotcha. Cool. Well, good luck with your project.
Yeah, let's see where it goes next.
Yeah, there should be a documentary coming out about it
Yeah, sometime next summer.
sometime
we
next
hope.
summer. All right, well, best of luck.
Thanks, Reed.
Sure thing.
Yeah.